ICQ Podcast episode 289, VHF UHF Weekender Transceiver Kit. Well, hello fellow Amateur Radio enthusiasts and welcome to this, our 289th episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported by our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB is joined by Chris, Mike 0, Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin, Mike 0, Sierra Golf Lima, Frank, Kilo 4, Foxtrot Mike Hotel to discuss latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a review of the UHF VHF Weekender Transceiver Kit. Well, unfortunately, for the first time in about 9 months, we have no one-off donors this episode, which is unfortunate. But as always, we'd like to thank our annual and monthly subscription donors for helping to keep the podcast advert-free. As always, you can do your part to keep our show, fresh from advertising and being sold to at mattresses and nutritional kits, etc. by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where anything you send our way goes towards our running costs and help keep the show advert-free. Well, let's get on with the show, and we'll join Martin, Chris, Martin and Frank to discuss the latest amateur radio news, including radar makes 5 MHz band useless and foundation books are free in Australia. I hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to the ICQ Podcast, episode 289. Tonight's Roundtable, I'm joined by Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Good evening, Martin. How are you getting on?
Yeah, pretty well. I think it's his third night in a row I've had a chat with you, isn't it?
I think it is. It is, yeah.
Yeah. And we're out of the weekend, I believe. Yeah.
Well, blimey, I know. It's a busy time. Busy time.
We also got Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL, who's probably going to try and get me into trouble, as always.
It happens. You know it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
I know, and we forgot your wedding anniversary on Sunday, didn't we? All of us.
That's fine. Because that was your wedding anniversary sometime soon, isn't it? Yeah, not for another year.
Yeah. Are we in Emma's bad books?
I remember that conversation, yes.
No, it's all good.
Yeah.
All good.
All right.
I remembered. That was the main thing.
That's the important thing.
I think if I had not remembered, I think I'd have then definitely been in the doghouse.
Yeah, you'd been staying with me, I expect.
And we don't even have a dog.
Yeah. All right. And from the other side of the pond, we have Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Martin and the guys. Glad to be with you again.
Yeah, great to have you, mate. And as I say, we've been at it for quite a while, so we've had discussed a lot as well on other things. Unfortunately, Mr. Dan Romacek, KB6NU, is not with us tonight. He has other prior engagements. But Dan will be back with us on a future episode. So, let's say, don't worry, we haven't lost him. Hi. Our first news.
Misplaced him temporarily.
We've misplaced him temporarily, yeah.
Put him down, he wanders off.
We're going to actually meet up with Dan. Shame you're not with us, but we're meeting up with Dan.
Do we have a squeaking chair sound effect? Martin, can you put that
in? No.
Let's see what we can do.
Yeah. We used to have a train whistle when we recorded a different podcast with Leslie, and every time Leslie said something, he got the train whistle, didn't he? But
I'm sure we can find it again.
Oh, sure you can. But that didn't have a clean rating, so I think we better be careful on that one. All right, our first news story. The DARC is complaining about radar making 5 MHz band literally useless. This is Russian coastal radar, the Sunflower broadcast system, literally coming up on 5 megs and wiping it out. What do you think, Chris?
Well, I'd heard of over the horizon radar before, but didn't really know what it was. So I did a bit of Googling. It's actually quite an interesting Wikipedia article all about it. And basically it's using a similar frequencies to what we use, like you said, the 5 MHz band. And it's relying on the ionosphere, just like we do as amateurs, to refract our signals around the Earth. So unfortunately, there's a bit of a contention there between us and them. And of course, this is used primarily by the military to track missiles and this sort of thing. So it's obviously quite political. It's not something I suspect. It's if you got the big superpowers, Russia, China, etc., involved, I'm afraid as amateurs probably aren't going to get much of a say. I wouldn't think.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with you on that one. Frank, it's not only happening over there in Russia, which would affect you guys, but look at this as well. Looks like the Chinese are doing it on 20 meters as well.
Absolutely. And, one comment is that the ITU is like any other kind of international body, United Nations, what have you, is that they work by cooperation. And when you have tension in the world, you're going to have defense systems that get deployed. And unfortunately, this is kind of one of the tips of the spear with the over-the-horizon radar for spotting things, testing things, seeing what you see and seeing what you don't see. And it's just a shame because, this new, 5 megahertz band, you get a little bit of interest in it, particularly in Germany because of that. And then it's just sort of taken away from you. So perhaps things will change, and who knows, they could.
Yeah. Well, I actually like the 60-meter band. I've been on it a few times, thoroughly enjoy it, and it's well worth. In fact, I'm actually thinking of even upgrading, doing the modification on a couple of other rigs so they can work on the 5 meg band. Martin, what's your thoughts?
I think that you're going to have a couple of diodes that are going to go ping. Well, good luck if it's Russia putting out these broadcasts. Good luck in getting them to abide by any frequencies and things like that. I think you might be fighting a losing battle there. But it does sound like the woodpecker all over again. If you've ever heard of the Russian woodpecker, you used to be able to buy noise blankers specifically for them, or woodpecker blankers. Now, I do have to wonder how over-the-horizon radar actually works. I mean, how does it work at HF? Because, I know radar, if you go around, say, for example, Heathrow Airport, they've got a massive microwave tower firing a radar out, and I know it affects the 23 SEMS local ATV repeater. But I'm trying to work out how this functions on HF. I mean, if it's bouncing off the ionosphere and using stuff up there, I mean, you've got to have that's some serious tech. And how do you know it's not just meteor scatter or something else happening up in the upper atmosphere? What makes you say that that noise up there that you're hearing is a missile compared to Dave on the south coast calling CQ?
Well, you can have 1 million watt over the horizon radar transmitters. So you're talking about lots of broadcast power there. With having several of them and looking at time delivery on arrival or time difference on arrival, to be able to detect certain things. Yeah, propagation would play a role in that, Martin, for sure. But just want to underscore, some of these things are massively, massively powerful in terms of broadcast power with directive array antennas, as I take it.
I just think I'm just struggling to get my head around how it would even work, because if you're sending something up into the ionosphere, the ionosphere, we know it can bounce up and down, with weather and things like that. It can go really, really quickly, and suddenly it's gone. And I'd be fascinated to see the tech behind it.
So I'm guessing they must be operating a range of frequencies, just like we do as amateurs, where they will know that at certain times of day, certain times of the year, specific bands will work better than others. I think it may be that the 5 megahertz issue may only be at certain times of the day or certain times of the year, but obviously it's a pain for us, isn't it?
Well, the US OTH is from 5 to 28 megahertz, and they kind of developed that about 25 years ago, and they spent about $1.5 billion on it. So I don't know about the Chinese or the Russian ones. I would guess they're probably not terribly different, but I could be wrong about that. But when you do them on multiple frequencies, as Chris was saying, and you look at their timing of bouncing or arrival, if you will, some of those calculations, as people are showing with the little SDR receivers now, there's some decent, kinds of data that can be extracted from that. But I share your concern, Chris, as to how it technically works underneath.
Yeah, well, don't forget, guys, at 5 megahertz, you could use MBIS, so you could probably track, right down low, almost at ground level, right out as far as about 600 miles. So it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one, but as you say, something that we can complain about. Whether a foreign government will do anything about it, very unlikely, but we'll still have to keep complaining. The next news story, Neil, G0WPO, has just achieved the SOTA Mountain Goat Award. A guy called Neil Griffiths, and he's from Rochdale, Lancashire. So, really ought to pass it for Chris, because he's up north, or from up north, but not Lancashire, are you, Chris? You're Yorkshire.
Not Lancashire, no, not too far though. Not too far from Lancashire. Well, yeah, I mean, incredible. 1,000 points is. I think I've got about 5, maybe 6 SOTA points. So 1,000 is a phenomenal achievement, and Neil must have been doing this for a while. I think it says it. Looking at this article, it says I think he started out in 2015, so he's done it in 3 or 4 years, which is not a huge amount of time to make that many points. So for those that don't know, with SOTA, different summits where you operate from. So the Mountain Goat Award is the one that you get by going up mountains and operating. There's a similar award for those people. So that you're known as an activator. If you're someone that talks to people up mountains from the luxury of your house, then you're called a shack sloth. And you can get a shack sloth award for getting, I think, 1,000 points. I think it's 1,000 points as a chaser, and I'm sure Ed Durant will be able to tell us, because Ed is a big SOTA operator. Will be able to tell us a lot more about that. But yeah, well done to Neil. That's a phenomenal achievement to get that many points, especially in that reasonably short amount of time. He's been up a lot of hills to do that. So I was saying that so you can get I think 1 point for the not too difficult hills to get up, but the more difficult the summits, the more points you get. And I've forgotten what the maximum number is. It might be something like 6. So it looks like he might have had to do quite a few of the more difficult summits to get that many points in such a short amount of time.
Well, I thought it was 10 points, Chris, but if it
maybe it's 10. Yeah. I'll Google it in a second. I'll let you know.
But if it's 10, you think about it, something like Everest or Kilimanjaro would be a 10-pointer. You'd still have to do 100 summits.
Well, it would be if you. I don't think Everest is actually one of the sorts of summits, but
no. But you know what I mean. It's no mean feat. Mine. What's your thoughts?
I can't help but thinking of that song and wondering if he was high on a hill with a lonely goat. That aside, well done to him. That's dedication. He did mention in the article that it inspired him to get more CW practice. So that'll keep Dan happy. More CW on the air. But yeah, congratulations to him. It's he's obviously worked hard for it, and well done.
Yeah, well, this guy is based in the UK, but Frank, we know some SOTA happens in the States because Ed's going to take us to activate a SOTA point when we're over in May, isn't he?
He is, and we've alerted all the people in Ohio to be on the alert for that. Hi. Let me just say this, and certainly Ed falls into this. I have tremendous respect for Ed. I have tremendous respect for Neil. This underscores that when we talk about amateur radio being a radio sport, there's a real physical dimension to this, in addition to the electronics and the technology. Just thinking about traveling, climbing, lugging gear, and there are certain rules about, how close or how far you can park and all this stuff. There's a certain physical stamina dimension of this. So my hat's off to him.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's a lot of work gone into this. So, Neil, congratulations from the ICQ podcast. We're really pleased. Our next news story, WIA provides free amateur radio foundation training books, and I believe this is to encourage newcomers into the hobby. They are making the books available to clubs that do training, and this is something that I feel quite pleased about, because I know as a trainer in the UK I've bought probably 6 or 7 different versions of our foundation book to teach a course that I never ever did and never ever required the book. But Frank, you go first, because we respect the WIA, but there was also the ARRL we talked about a couple of episodes back, where you were trying to get free postage as well, which is another nice thing to try and get.
Well, yeah, I had an editorial piece that was featured on the ICQ podcast page from my blog at k4fmh.com. And I was simply trying to use the current CEO, Howard Mickle's argument that we need to add value to membership. And I was saying, hey, free shipping for members is a very common inducement for many organizations. Some benefit there directly. In this case, it's not directly to members, but it's for affiliated clubs. Now, there's also an ARRL parallel here. I'm unsure about the RSGB. But ARRL has affiliated clubs, and they have certain things that they'll do for them and those kinds of things. What this does is help train the trainers, is it gives the trainers to teach new hams material that they don't have to pay for. And it's certainly in the vested interest of the WIA. The ARRL, in my opinion, doesn't really know what to do with clubs that well. And so by the ARRL taking note of what our friends in Australia are doing, that might give them a standard to think about how to encourage clubs to train hams. And anything we can do within reason to do that is clearly an added value proposition for whichever group it is.
Yeah, I agree with you, Frank. And certainly the WIA do a great job down there in Australia. Martin, you any thoughts on this one?
Well, if it helps the trainers get the material that they need, it can only be good. All trainers, of course, do this for free. So it's only right they should get the material that they need to produce this for free. Although, in my mind, I'm thinking that if the national body of any country, for that matter, isn't going to provide the training material, surely there's an incentive there for the ham radio dealers to sponsor providing the training materials, because let's face it, the more people that are on the air, the more radios you're going to ship.
You've just probably given my friend Martin a panic. Oh dear, stop it.
I think I've actually seen, do you know what? I think I've actually seen things in some of the UK material which have adverts in, actually. I think there might be leaflets and things in some of the... does that ring any bells to you, Martin? Butler?
I remember seeing an advert to join the RSGB on the centre. There was like a pull-out form.
I was thinking there might have been some other things in there as well, but
either way, you'd have still had to pay for the book and the material. I mean, this is the chance for... we all know who the big dealers are, but it's the chance for them to reach in their pocket. Okay, if you're registered as a trainer, we're going to donate this much.
All the manufacturers.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, our absent fellow presenter, Dan Romanchik, gives his tech book away free to the individual ham. So Dan's setting the way here.
It's a very good point.
Yeah, and Dan's just an individual. He's not. He's not in it for his own. He's not going to gain anything as a result of this.
Well, correct. I suppose if someone uses Dan's technician book and it was successful, it's perhaps more likely to go and then buy the subsequent books and the other exams. Yeah. Absolutely, and that's
he may look at it as a lost leader, so he gives that away. He may do something on the back end, but certainly as Martin said, he's just a one person shop here.
Yeah.
He's not a big company. He has other things to sell.
Exactly.
But I suppose all Dan's doing that as a download of a PDF, so it's not part of Dan's time in writing the material.
Correct.
He's not having to spend money on printing things or any that sort of thing. It's virtually free to distribute by in that way. Absolutely, yeah. And I don't know, maybe that's a model that can be followed elsewhere in the world. I think for me, the whole point of our national societies, or certainly one of the points there, is to try to promote the hobby and get more people into the hobby and giving it, prolonging the life of the hobby, essentially. So why, let's make it as easy as we possibly can to get people into the hobby. So if that means giving away a free PDF which gives you all the material to pass at least the first exam in the hobby, that's a good thing, surely.
Absolutely, and I think, to be fair, we talk about Dan. We should probably mention, if anybody does want to look at it, KB6NU is the place to look for that.
Yeah. Now I can kind of understand in that the author, the person who puts the book together, puts a lot of work into it. So, I think the author should get paid, but I think I think it should be down to either a national society or via sponsorship.
But as a loss leader, even a national society, okay, so you get more people in the hobby, therefore you're going to get more members of your society and more people paying their subscription. So actually, they may not be paying the £4.50 whatever it costs to buy the UK Foundation book, but you end up getting a subscription for £50 a year off that person potentially if they pass their exam.
And you're going to make your money back in the long run anyway. It's a no-brainer, really.
Yeah. Well, the RSGB used to put a reduced membership cost in for the first year. And
Yes.
9 times out of 10, people just renew it. You know, they see it's good value and they just renew it. So, yeah, I think we all agree on that one. Great work there being done by the WIA. And let's hope others around the world follow on with what's happening over there in Australia. Now, this one is probably for Frank because it's his side of the pond, but Radio Ham takes on the Department of Justice. Now, when we discussed this earlier, the only thing about Radio Ham is the guy's got a license, an amateur license. It's really to do with his broadcast station, isn't it, Frank?
It is. I looked into, what this boils down to through the post in the story in the Washington Post. Excuse me. And Arnold Farolito, who happens to hold the call sign K2PEV, owns RM Broadcasting LLC. The Department of Justice has served notice served notice to him that he needs to register as a foreign agent under the Foreign Agents Registration Act passed in 1938 here in the States. Now, what is going on is that he leases time on perhaps more than one station, but certainly 1390 AM in Washington, D.C., where he has his studio not far from the White House, according to the story. He then releases that to a publishing company in Russia that is funded by the Russian government, and it's called Sputnik Radio. And so because he is in leasing them time on a broadcast station that he has already leased here in the States, the Department of Justice says those two dominoes fall over. You are acting as a foreign agent. You must register. His response is, not so fast. I've got constitutional rights. Let's take it to a judge in court. And that's where we are. If our listeners will think about some of the recent history of the states for the 2016 election, the argument about Russia kind of interfering one way or another through social media, this would include just regular broadcast radio as well. So that's the argument in a nutshell. And I'm not taking one side or the other, but that's the best I could figure it out, Martin.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, and it sounds like he's just trying to fight the system for the sake of fighting the system. Martin, you're in broadcast. What do you think on this one?
Well, I'm probably not in this kind of broadcast, and I'm certainly not involved with the transmission side. So they think he's broadcasting propaganda for leasing airtime. Now, every broadcaster has to have a license. Now, okay, you see videos on YouTube of people talking about short-range, low-power broadcast transmitters in America. I know you can do that, but if you're licensed, it's fair to ask him to register if that's an FCC rule. If it's a rule of your license, then you do what you are told to do by the FCC. If you don't do that, then as far as I'm concerned, you're in breach of your license, and you should surrender your license and therefore may be taken off the air. If you're unlicensed, either by you're going under the rules of, I don't know what you call it, a low-powered FM license. I know that's a different thing in America, but bear with me. Then you have to abide by the rules of running that low-power station. Or if you're a pirate, good luck. Simple as. But we think he's licensed. We think he's legal. If that's the case, then I would suggest consult your license, because your license that you agree to with the FCC and your regulator will effectively override any constitutional rule that you may or may not think you have. I mean, that's my thought on this.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. And certainly, I must admit, it's probably the same all around the world, but we have enough problems with pirate radio stations in London, let alone other parts of the world. Chris, you any thoughts on this one?
Well, not that's not something I fully understand, but I think clearly this guy's making a point. I think we were discussing before we started recording. I think there's quite a significant amount of money involved in this, in what's going on in terms of, he's broadcasting content from Russia, and I think they're paying him for that. And I think he's making the point that he shouldn't need to have this particular permission to do it, and he's fighting it. Although I don't think it's going to cost him very much time or cost to get that permission. So I think he's just proving a point, isn't he? Really. So I'm not sure I fully understand why, and we'll see what comes of the court case.
Yeah. Well, there's one court case that if I won the European lottery, I might decide to play, and I'm not going to tell you guys what it is. Some of you already know, but I'm not saying on the podcast, because the minute I win the court case, the whole thing, that they will change the law to say that I haven't won, so it would be a hollow victory. And I think that's what you've got to do. You've got to obey by the rules in many ways. So there you go. Moving on, the ITU is strengthening emergency telecommunications in the Americas. So not just the States, but the whole of South America as well. And there's once again, WinLink raised its head in this one, doesn't it, Frank?
Well, it does. And, we featured some other technical issues on a previous episode of the ICQ podcast involving WinLink, particularly the Pactor 4 variant. This one is interesting. WinLink has seemed to become the go-to mode of transmission for many MCOM hams in the U.S., and certainly the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, ARRL, sponsored by the ARRL. I will say, if you think about what's happened over the last couple of years with natural disasters, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and all, I've made the recommendation to the president of ARRL when he was talking here about what they're planning on doing. I said, keeping a repeater on the western mountain in Puerto Rico permanently just sort of pre-deploys the kind of communication assets that the ARRL has to ship down repeatedly to the Caribbean. So by the same stretch, I think establishing some of these WinLink connections from places, especially the islands, the coast, and places that are hit by natural disasters that are weather-related, would be a good thing. And it's a kind of proven commodity, and you don't have to rely on voice. You can transmit spreadsheets of, quite frankly, people who are deceased or people who are missing, or medical needs that you would not call out routinely, over voice. So I see a very potential positive move forward to help protect life and limb here in the Americas.
Yeah, I'll say it sounds interesting. Chris, you got any thoughts on this one?
Well, I think Frank's pretty much summed it up. Especially in that part of the world where you get the hurricanes, lots of hurricanes and other serious weather conditions. Thankfully, we don't get quite that in the part of the world we're in. I think it's a really important thing to have amateur radio, and I think it's something that shows our hobby in a very good light when we come in and we provide that level of assistance. So I think Frank's right. I think WinLink is very useful. It's a way of transferring information. It's a way of it's a really benefit to those communities when those things happen. So I kind of agree that what's being proposed looks like it's a great thing.
Yeah, certainly is. Any last thoughts on this one, Martin?
Well, it's the emergency comms is not as big in the UK. Of course, I know the USA depend on this kind of thing for major emergencies. So anything that can strengthen it has to be good. But I've got nothing really other to add other than what's already been said there.
Yeah. Well, that's fair, Martin. And anything that helps save life and around the world is good in my books. We're doing a service. We're putting something back in. So that's a good one. Now, it's with a sad heart I have to make the next. Technically, it's an announcement. The Reverend George Dobbs, G3RJV, is now unfortunately a silent key. He died earlier this week at his home in Rochdale, I believe. We was there with his wife Jo, and George was a megastar, in my opinion, in QRP. I was lucky enough to meet George once at his parish church at Rochdale when the GQRP conventions used to be held there. Really, really nice gentleman, and he's going to be sadly missed. Those of you who read Practical Wireless would know him from his column he used to write every month. So, really, really sorry, George, but our thoughts go to your family. Guys, I think, Frank, you wanted to say something?
Well, I'm a modest QRPer, and I'm an avid listener of the podcast Solder Smoke with Bill Mira. And his name is well known to me, even though I'm not, a big QRP operator. And so the name George Dobbs certainly has made an impact, certainly in the U.S., and I would certainly echo your sentiments, thinking about his family, and certainly a life well lived.
Yeah. Guys, any last comments on this one?
Well, I think similarly. I've never met George, but I certainly knew his name, and I think a lot of people, certainly here in the UK, and like Frank was saying, maybe further afield, have heard of George Dobbs, and his work with QRP. So yeah, we pass on our condolences.
Yeah. Well, we move on then. As I say, our condolences to the whole family from all the team at ICQ Podcast. Our last news story, Frank, once again, you put this one in. I was late to the party on this, but you did explain before we started recording. There's issues in the ARRL iOS app for QST. It's denying digital-only subscribers access to their QST magazine. So do you want to go first, Frank?
You bet. There's a post on the league's website to that effect, and that they're working with the developer to fix that. Now, this is in the midst of a multi-year pattern with ARRL promoting league members going to digital only, and save paper, cost us less, digital only, go do it. Well, as of a update of the iOS app, which is produced for the American Radio Relay League by a large company, PageSuite. They're based in the United Kingdom. They have a Boston, Massachusetts, U.S. office. They made a custom app for iOS and as well as Android. And so this one little glitch, these things happen. I've been involved in software development, leading teams, and a long, long time ago coding before I could spend the same amount of time and generate money and hire a coder that does it every day. So I'm familiar with some of these things, and glitches do happen. However, if one looks at the iTunes website, you'll see the reviews of this app are about 2.3 or so on the average. And on the Android Google Play Store, they're about 2.5. And you go back 5 years ago, and there was another announcement of a major glitch in the iOS app. So it begs this question, and I don't want to beat Bob Ingerbritsen, who is the marketing director of ARRL, over the head, because these things do happen. But I do think the league should take note that at least over 5 years, the performance of this app has had one problem after the other. A glitch here, glitch there. And when you promoted it to subscribers and then they go digital and they can't get their QST, let's face it, you're going to need a Snickers bar to get over that. You're not going to be yourself. So it reminds me a little bit about Logbook of the World. If you remember, the league did that sort of in-house with the local IT gurus who did not have what it takes to scale that up. And it was a little bit of a disaster until some of the board members directed the office to take that to a more professional platform. So what happens now with Logbook of the World? They're bigger, better, faster. They've got 1 billion QSOs logged, and they're incorporating additional services from CQ Magazine. So I think it's time for the league to take a look at this PageSuite app and see if, this thing can be kind of fixed once and for all.
Yeah, well, I think if somebody is paying for it, they should certainly get their magazine. I'm going to go to Martin first because I know Chris has got a few things to say about this as well. But what do you think, Martin? Should you get your magazine or not?
I'm thinking a bug in an Apple product? Never. I am so surprised. I mean, unbelievably surprised that there could be a bug in an Apple product. I mean, you can tell I'm an Android user, can't you? And I detest my company iPhone.
So I think my sarcasm
it's just as bad on Android. If you look at reviews, it's just as bad on Android.
I was a member of the ARRL. You know what? I just couldn't justify the cost. I didn't particularly enjoy the magazine and things. And there's nothing wrong with it. I didn't read it. I didn't have the time for it. But yeah, if you have paid for your magazine, yes, you should get it. No, okay, they're saying you can go and get this from your computer. If you use a proper computer, you can get onto the internet, you can download your PDF or however it normally comes down, and you can get it. But if you've bought the product with the assumption that you will be able to download it on your smartphone, be you on an Android or an Apple or whatever, then you should be able to do that. And if you can't do that because it just happens to not be working on your particular product at the moment, then personally, I think the ARRL should be compensating you for that, either with a free month or however long it's not been working for, or something else for that matter. That's my own views on it. But I still refuse to believe there's a problem with an Apple product.
Yeah. Behave yourself.
A problem on an Apple product, sorry.
At least it's not a worm in the apple.
Yeah. Sorry, before Tim Apple gets in contact and says he's not happy with us.
Yeah. Right. Well, Chris, comment on this, but I know you've also got some problems rejoining.
I'm gonna have a slight rant now. So I was a member of the ARRL. In fact, Martin, I think you and I both signed, didn't we? I think a number of years ago at a rally. I think it must have been the RSGB convention where Bob was attending. Nicest guy on amateur radio, I've got to say, genuinely. And we signed up, and that was great. And we received, I was receiving the paper magazine through the post. I think it's before they had the digital version, before the apps. I think this is going back probably maybe 5 or 6 years now. So I think it's before they had that option. And then I think I signed up for something like 3 years. Anyway, when it came up for renewal, I renewed and I chose the digital version only, which was fine. And I used it with my Android tablet I had at the time, and that seemed to work okay. I didn't have this problem with I think this is a more recent thing. I think this problem, but then my subscription lapsed, and I thought, I really must get around to renewing that. And I about a month ago, I thought, I really must go and renew my subscription. So I went online to the website and went to the renew my subscription page, and it said enter your call sign. So I put in my US call sign, the one that I'd used with my membership there, and it all said into your subscriber ID. I'm like, well, I think your membership number or some sort of number. I'm like, I have no idea what that is. So I looked at my email and I couldn't find anything there. So you look at the help page. It says, you will find this on the wrapper from your QST magazine. And I'm like, what, is that the only place I can? So basically, what they made it very difficult for me now to renew. And I had to email someone or phone somebody in the States to be able to get back on the membership again. So that's put me off, shall we say. They made it very difficult for me to actually renew my membership. So a bit of feedback for the ARRL, guy, if you want people to subscribe to your service, make it easy for them. Don't make it difficult. Don't put in surely my call sign is unique. I shouldn't need to put in some other sort of number as well. You made it hard for me to do that. So, I'm less likely to want to renew. So anyway, rant over.
Yeah, well, I think in fairness, we're not here kicking the ARRL. We're offering some very frustrated guys offering some feedback to you. And hopefully you do listen to this podcast, or somebody from the ARRL will listen to this podcast, because there are frustrated people out there that want to be part of, and they're just pointing out where the pitfalls are.
Actually, I will say, QST magazine is actually a very good magazine. I quite enjoyed reading it, and I actually prefer the paper version, to be honest. Even though I end up with big piles of magazines in my house from different subjects, I did enjoy it. And the other benefit of receiving it through the post was you don't forget to read it. If you get it in a device, you sometimes forget to check there's a new edition coming out, and you miss a few copies, you know. Whereas getting a paper version of it is actually, I quite prefer that, to be honest, even though it maybe costs a little bit more for the shipping.
Yeah, I agree
Martin,
with you.
let me just kind of echo what you said. This is really not to try to bash the ARRL per se, but you know, as new CEO has said, he wants to leverage a greater value added by virtue of being a member. And I don't think it's PageSuite's fault. PageSuite's a major company. They do the Boston Globe as a news. I mean, just a number of things. But these companies, from my experience, and some of the other presenters, you know, may have some experiences that's relevant here as well. A big vendor. I used to be a $250,000 customer to some GIS companies. Would they take my call on the first ring? You bet they would. Somebody who was paying $50 a month or $300 a year for that, they'd wait in line. So when you've got a big client, of which the ARRL is not, that's one custom app, you allocate more labor focus on the bigger customer. And I really think that's probably, my intuition is that's probably what's going on. And there's probably some digital rights management issues that are coming to play here. And Android and iOS have a little different ways of handling that. And they have a right to protect the product. Let's compare it, say, to Spectrum Monitor, which is a magazine that succeeded Bob Grove's fine magazine. They thought it was more trouble than it's worth, and I'm a subscriber to Spectrum Monitor. You know how they send that out? They send you an email that says, go to this link. You go to this link and said, you're currently subscribed. Click on this link. You click on that link, and you download an unrestricted PDF. And they trust their members not to send it all over the world and be unfair. Now, I'm not suggesting ARRL should necessarily do that because they sell all this stuff on DVD at the end of the year. And other than QST, I drop my subscriptions to the others, and I just buy the DVD at the end of the year. So I don't think there's a bad culprit here in it, and I'm not bashing Bob Interbits, and he's the person who's charged with dealing with this. But I just think that the PageSuite contract with the ARRL has been very poor in its performance over at least 5 years. And let's face it, a magazine that's not doing very well financially, CQ, they're kind of hanging on there. They use a competitor from Zenio, and they rarely have serious problems. So it can be done. So I don't want to bash ARRL. And Chris, in contrast, I enjoy the digital versions because I can click on links and it takes me directly to the ad at the manufacturer or something else. Now that is again, there's trade-offs. There's trade-offs, but I don't want to bash them. I just hope they fix it.
Yeah. Well, I believe if you have the printed version, you also get the digital version as well. So you have the best of both worlds. But let's hope the ARRL take this on board the way it's intended. You know, this is criticism is good if it's constructive, and I believe this to be constructive. So there you go. Right, well, that concludes the news stories, and I'll say a good evening's worth of news stories, some interesting stuff we've discussed. Now let's find out what you guys have been up to. Chris, what have you been up to since our last recording?
Not a massive amount. We've been to, as we always said, every episode pretty much, we've been to HMS Belfast. We met some interesting people there last weekend. Lots of chats with the public, but apart from that, I haven't done an awful lot of operating, so not a huge amount to report. You and I are both running a foundation training course in the last couple of weeks, so no doubt on the next episode we'll be talking all about how that got on. But that's about it from me.
Yeah. Well, on the just quickly, would say we always talk about Belfast, but I'll give you a bit more of an update on that in a minute because I had a couple of things happen. Martin, what have you been up to in radio-wise?
I'll be honest to say, not very much. I did speak to Edmund on D-Star the other day. I was having a play with my D-Star radio, and I didn't recognise the call sign, but I recognised the voice. It was Edmund operating in his club, so I think someone brought a radio up for him to play with. So I had a chat with Edmund on D-Star. Otherwise, not a lot going on, just playing with network radio, really. Just seeing what's going on there, and really quite enjoying that. I know it's not radio before people get in touch and say it's not radio, but it's been very, very interesting. Not even been doing much fusion this month, just because I haven't really had time.
Yeah, well, I know you do network radio because a couple of times mine's gone off when you've been looking for me, and he's left it somewhere. Like I can hear the voice, or Mrs. B says, "You've been called. You're not answering your radio." Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
The other one is you mentioned Edmund. Edmund got an award within the last week from his own club for putting his club call sign on the air for a year and doing a lot of work. So congratulations, Edmund, on that one. That was a good one.
Well done, Edmund.
Indeed.
Yeah. Frank, what have you been up to radio-wise since the last time we chatted to you?
Well, a little indirect radio with my ARRL hat with the Delta Division. We had an area club that had a bad actor in a VE team, head of VE team, lost some exams. Can you imagine 2 or 3 months of exams that just got lost? So they lost their accreditation. Well, all that got investigated over the last couple of years, and I was able to work with Dave Norris, the Delta Division director, and we got the bad actor out. We got a new team. We've come up with a new audit process so that a couple of area clubs will send VE members once every 3 months and audit what they're doing, and they've gotten reaccredited. So they'll be producing new or testing and licensing new hams. And I did a little bit of that indirect radio. On the direct radio side, I've got a new site for an APRS digipeater east of Jackson, Mississippi, in a little community. It'll be on top of a 300-foot water tower. So we can hear you now. That will be a major digipeater around the Jackson area. And I finished up the fusion programming on a couple of repeaters and got them all bundled up with a couple of, we're going to run them at 5 watts with a little amp on each one, and they'll be cooking along about 60 watts or so. And the person who manages the broadcast sites that they'll be situated at, I'm waiting on him to come by and pick those up, since only he can go into the broadcast site. One of the towers, by the way, is next to a prison. And they have a problem with people driving by that prison and throwing bags of contraband, cell phones, cigarettes, marijuana, all these bad things. But you have to go that road to get to this one TV station, this broadcast tower. And he was arrested recently and held for 3 hours until the TV station authenticated him as a good guy. So I don't want to go on that trip, so he'll take them and install them on the tower. The fun and games that we play with ham radio.
Yeah, certainly, Frank. That sounds an interesting place to go. Okay. Well, Chris said we've been to the Belfast. HMS Belfast once again. Vlad, who was over and I put a call out on the 2-meter call-in channel. Got this really strong signal back, and Vlad was from Romania, was it, Chris?
He was, he is from Romania, that's right,
yeah, Romania. Called me back, and we had a chat, and then he popped by the radio room with his good lady. We invited him in. He took some photographs. I've got the photographs, Chris.
Yeah. So I mean, the point is that he was walking around, wasn't he, Martin, with his handheld in his pocket on the ship when you were calling out. So it's like, I think that's the first we've actually made a contact with somebody actually on the ship who was a visitor.
Yeah. So that was good. That was good. He popped by. He sent me some pictures of us doing the Morse with that group of scouts and cubs that were there. So that some interesting pictures there. Couple of weeks ago, I just decided that was it. Lunchtime on Saturday, I was going to go out and operate. And I decided to do something that probably most people think was really silly. I jumped in the car, grabbed my 4-meter FM transceiver and my mobile whip, which is a quarter wave into an PL259. And I drove to a car park on top of a hill and effectively worked 3 counties. I had 5 contacts within an hour, 3 counties, and I was really pleased with it. Got good signal reports from all the stations. So, Formies FM, as other Martin will tell you, is alive and well, and works very well.
Deal.
Yeah, so that was fun on 70 megs. And the only other thing I've been doing, and I'm not going to talk too much about it, is I built a UHF transceiver kit for the feature in this episode. Richard Pazina, I think it is from memory, G8ITB, I believe, donated it for me to deal with, and we decided to build it as a feature for the podcast. And I'm not saying too much more about it because if you won't listen to the feature, hi. So we've all been fairly busy, and looks like we've done well. Right, as I close up this section and we say 73s to each other, this is not the end of the podcast, as Chris will tell you. It's only the end of this section. So I'd like to say 73s to Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH.
Cheers, guys. 7-3. Have fun. It's been good, fun as usual.
Yeah. 73s to Martin Rothwell M0SGL.
73s, and as I say, stick around. There's more coming up.
There is. And Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH.
And don't leave on my account, folks, although I am about to exit stage left. 73s, 1 to each of you.
Yeah, 73s, Frank, and all of you. And we'll do it all again in a fortnight's time. 73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BOY. We start with news with listener Dustin Thomas, November 8 Romeo Mike Alpha, and he's starting off again his project in relation to the State of the Amateur Radio Hobby Survey, which is being updated for this year 2019. This is an opportunity to take part again. There was great success in the 2018 survey, loads of people took part, etc., and he's hoping again to make this an even better survey this year. Survey went live this month and will continue for the rest of March, and so it's good news there for everybody a chance to get their opportunity to get their points of view across. So we're going to put a link to this on the ICQpodcast.com website, so you can go along and check this out. I say when you finish driving or when you're out and about listening to the show, take part in the survey for Dustin, and he'll let us know in due course when that information is published. You may remember recently we've been talking to BYLARA, the British Young Ladies Amateur Radio Association. It's their 40th Ruby anniversary this year of the group, and they've produced their first all-colour Bulletin magazine, which is available to read. Now, obviously, while aimed at the ladies of our hobby, it also obviously has interesting articles for everybody associated with amateur radio. So again, as always, link on icqpodcast.com for you to visit and download and have a look from there. And we finish off as well with news in the UK. The RSGB AGM online voting is now open. The AGM will take place on the 27th of April 2019 in Birmingham. And along with finding information on the resolutions in the April issue of Radcom, you can also check out the RSGB's website at rsgb.org/AGM 2019. So certainly members, get involved and make your voice heard at your AGM. Well, now we head over to our features episode, which is a feature on the UHF VHF Weekender Transceiver Kit review by Martin M1MRB. I hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi, for this episode's feature, I wanted to talk about the Weekend VHF UHF Transceiver Kit. This transceiver kit was donated to the ICQ podcast by Mr. Richard Pazina, G8ITB. Richard turned up at the club and he said, Martin, is this any use for you guys to do something with? And effectively we decided to build it as a project for the ICQ podcast. This is an unbiased review of the Weekend Radio Project Kit, built by myself, Martin Butler, M1MRB /W9ICQ. I outline my findings and results in the conclusions at the end of this video. The kit is based around a DR818U UHF band voice transceiver module, which you control with a microcontroller. This kit is built around the DR818U UHF band voice transceiver controller, and as I said before, is controlled by a microcontroller. The output power of this radio can either be 0.5 of a watt or 1 watt, depending on the jumper setting that you do on the main PCB. I have looked at the functional diagram, and for those of you listening voice only, it is available. If you look up the DR818U on the internet, you can get a data sheet which shows you the different pinouts for this particular module. Now, this particular module is about 2 inches by 1 inch by 1/4 of an inch high, and it's pretty much a transceiver in its own right. It just needs the controlling circuitry around it. So moving on, the documentation. Richard, when he gave it to me, gave me the links to the documentation that he'd been sent. You download the files off the internet, and they give you some instructions on how to build it and how to operate the radio. Now, interestingly enough, in the package was a small slip of paper with about 3 lines of changes to some of the components, saying one thing changes to another. And that was certainly helpful, because when you start looking for components, you've had a bit of a problem. I downloaded the instructions, and away we went. Now, when I unboxed it, and I didn't record a video of unboxing, but when I unboxed it, the components were good quality components. Let's be brutally honest about it. I've taken a picture for the video, although you guys listening audio can't see this. There were a couple of extra bits Richard had put in with the kit, so I had some extra bits, which rather threw me for a few seconds. But once worked out what he'd been up to, that wasn't too much of a problem. Looking at the circuit diagram, and for those of you who are listening audio, I'll explain it. The circuit diagram is kind of been drawn modular. So for argument's sake, each individual section is drawn separately, and then on the sheet of A4, and then the interconnecting leads obviously are marked with labels saying which lead goes to where. Now, the radio itself uses an LM386 as an audio amplifier, which is perfectly acceptable. It has a mute circuit on the audio amplifier, so when you go to transmit, it mutes the audio from the receiver at the audio amplifier. There's another part of the circuit that used for display. Now, that's driven from the microcontroller, but they actually use a old Nokia phone display, which works very, very well. As I said, the RF module, the DR818U, has circuitry around it with the PA coming straight out of that module through a low-pass filter and the microphone input circuit going into it. There's also a section showing the connections around the microcontroller, connections on how the power supply works, and the rotary encoder for obviously changing channel. Now, one thing I looked at very strange is for the power supply. The power supply runs off 13.8 volts, as we'd expect. Looking at it, it has a 5 volt regulator, and I would guess it was a 1 amp 5 volt regulator. Now, from the 13.8 volts, it goes through 4 diodes, so obviously you're looking at getting about a 2.4 volt drop across those silicon diodes before you go to the input of the 5 volt regulator. Now, I thought the 5 volt regulator could have handled straight in at 13.8 volts, but nevertheless. And the far side of the power supply the 5-volt rail comes out, goes through another diode and a choke, and effectively you end up with 4.2 volts HT, or voltage, which the whole unit works on. As I say, I understand that a number of you can't see this because you're listening audio. The printed circuit board, very nicely made printed circuit board. The top side is silk screened, and it has the labels of where each component goes, nicely silk screened, and their values. And for the most part, you can just build it off that. There are a few changes, because if you're building the VHF module or the UHF module, you would obviously have to change some of the components. The downside is there is no instructions for putting this together. So you really are reliant on this silk screen layout on the board as to where all the components go. But more on that later. Moving on, the rear of the printed circuit board is very well made as well. So it's a double-sided board, a very clean and tidy layout, which is quite impressive. And, let's say, a nicely manufactured PCB. It took me a little while because I don't rush these things, and I suppose the most difficult part was soldering on the DR818U module onto the printed circuit board. You solder it to the top like a surface mount, big surface mount device. The rest of the components are through hole, and you have an LED to show whether you're high power or low power. As I say, once again, that's inside the unit, so you pretty much set it up once and leave it. The ICs are socketed. The microcontroller is socketed into the board along with the LM386, so very well put together and quality of components. The front panel, you end up assembling a volume control onto it, the rotary controller, a dual colour LED, red and green, the microphone socket, and the display module, as I said, which is a Nokia phone panel, which is very, very useful. Now, when you come to put this together, as I say, with the documentation, all it gives you is a picture of the printed circuit board and a picture of where the wires all go. So you have to follow them through, you have to keep your wits about you, and make sure you wire it correctly. Now, the way they show the speaker being connected, they show the loudspeaker being connected to the board, and they also show a loudspeaker socket in parallel with the actual speaker. Now, I think that is a mistake. I think that what they really intended to do is have it break the circuit so that when you plug an external speaker in, it disables the little internal speaker. But the way they're showing you to wire it, it isn't wired that way. So if you're expecting an 8 ohm impedance and your speaker's an 8 ohm and you put another 8 ohm in there, you've got a 4 ohm impedance, and it might make the chip, the LM386, do some funny things. Haven't tried that, but we'll see. The front panel, very clean and nice. The left hand side is the volume control. In the middle you've got the display, so you can see what's going on. The one I have says VHF, UHF, RTX on the top, above the display. And when Richard bought it, he had the front panel engraved with his call sign G8ITB. To the right of the display, you have the frequency adjuster, which is the rotary controller, and the dual colour LED, and the microphone input socket. Now, interestingly enough, I thought that the LED would grow green when it saw a signal and red when it's in transmit. It turns out it's green all the time it's in receive, whether it's got a signal or not. So that threw me for just a few seconds. But, you know, it's because of the information is in the documentation, you wasn't sure what to expect there. The front panel say very, very good. it assembles into quite a nice case. The case is probably, in fairness, one of the better parts of the whole thing. The only thing I felt is when you pick it up, it feels very, very light. Doesn't feel quality. Now, that's not the problem with the case. It's just you expect it to be really heavy, and this kit isn't. So, going forward with that. The interconnecting wires, in my opinion, were far too short. When you come to wire it up and fit the board into the case, you fit the PCB in the bottom of the case, you fit the front and back panels. The interconnecting wires, some of them were too short, and I had to remove the ones supplied and fit longer ones to be able to use it. And at the moment, the speaker is on a longer wire of its own and stuck to the inside the cabinet at the moment for testing purposes. So a little bit disappointed on the length of the leads. They weren't long enough, and if you were trying to do this on your own, you could get well and truly stuck. However, because the leads are so short, you're kind of stuck because you're trying to dress the cables to make it look nice, and I just couldn't get it to look nice. I tried cable tying bits together to try and improve it, but it still didn't look pretty inside with the cables. Now, you could say that's my fault because I didn't build it properly. Well, I'm going to put my hand up for that. That's the best I could do, and as I say, I would have liked to have seen cables laid better and slightly longer. Unfortunately, my unit that I was building had a 40 DRA 818U module, and lucky for me, Richard, when he'd purchased the kit, decided to purchase a couple of these modules, so I had a spare one to fit in. But without it, I'd have been absolutely snookered. Yeah, I could have bought one, but I think it was disappointing that the one I had was 40. I don't believe I blew it up, but I have to be honest about it, I could have done. Now, I did take the unit apart, and as I said, it's about 2 inches long by about an inch wide and probably about a quarter of an inch high. And for those of you who are going to look at this video, I took the lid off and you can see inside, and there's quite a bit inside it. There's a couple of big chips and the power transistor. What looks to be like a button in the unit is looks like a button or a battery is actually the heat sink for the PA, which is quite interesting. But yeah, we got it working in the end. That and a couple of other silly little issues in the documentation, and we got it working. So going to the conclusions. Well, what are my conclusions on this kit? Well, I think the worst thing about this kit was a very, very, very poor documentation. I'm sorry, the documentation just let the whole thing down. The interconnecting cables for the kit are far too short. You know, an inch or so more would have made this that problem go away. The parts recommended for a couple of modifications in the documentation weren't supplied. So the documentation spent more about these modifications for stopping it staying in transmit if you use a rubber duck with it, or a couple of capacitors across the microphone cables. They talked more about that than they really did about building the radio, which I felt was quite strange. And then they didn't supply the kit. Now, mine didn't work first time, and I probably spent a fair amount of time fault finding it, because you don't want to rip out one of these expensive modules just for the sake of it. You want to be dead sure when you do it that that's the problem. But as I say, turned out to be that. A little bit disappointed it didn't work first time. This is not a kit for a beginner. You would not suggest to sit down and do a build-a-thon with this with a group of newbies. There's just no way they could build this. If you haven't built any kits before, you will really struggle. Performance testing on air was okay. You know, I only tested it on air. I didn't put any test equipment on it. It seemed okay. But the downside is, with all this, when I'm being honest about it, this radio has less functionality than a Baofeng UV3R. Yes, you heard me right, the 3R, the original little baby 1 watt transceiver, has more functionality than this kit. While most of us would not be able to design and produce a kit like this, and it's easy to find fault with it afterwards, the radio menus system is a little bit finicky and takes a bit of getting used to. It's not intuitive in my opinion, but you learn radio menu systems, so that could have been better. Now, this could be a good kit with the issues listed before fixed. However, you wouldn't build this kit to save money. I don't know how much Richard paid for it, but I'm sure you could pick up a UV3R, Baofeng UV3R, for a lot less money than this kit, and you got more functionality. So, in conclusion, interesting piece of kit to build. Yes, it gave me a few headaches. Yeah, I had fun building it. Cost effectively? Not really. And all in all, if the documentation was better, I'd give it much higher marks, but I'd probably only give this kit a 2 out of 10 because the documentation let it down. I'm sorry to say that. So hopefully this was a fair and honest opinion of mine. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you like what you see and gives us a thumbs up. Once again, the ICQ podcast is a fortnightly audio podcast on amateur/ham radio, and we've been doing it since July 2008. And website is www.icqpodcast.com, where you can get more information. So all's left for me to do now is say 73s from M1MRB/W9ICQ.
Hi, Mrs. B here. Please sign up to our newsletter. We won't share your data and only send you relevant podcast information. We thank you for your support. 73's Mrs. B.
Well, Dad, thanks for the feature on the UHF VHF Weekender Transceiver, and certainly I hope that our listeners appreciate your honest thoughts on the device.
Yeah, I hope they do, Colin. As I said in the summing up of it, there was a lot of work went into it. The guy who designed it must have done a fair amount of work, and he did a lot of things really well, but he just let himself down on the documentation, and that's a real shame. But with a bit of help and a relaunch, it would probably be quite a reasonable kit, although you wouldn't build it to save any money because it's got slightly less function than a Baofeng UV3R. So there you go.
Do you know what, though? I'm not ever quite sure that people build kits always to save money. I think sometimes they just build them just for the enjoyment of building a kit. Sometimes you look at if it's a price of a few pints of beer. Sometimes you get a lot more enjoyment than drinking a couple of pints, don't you?
Yeah. I agree with you. There are often, let's face it, the little 40-meter receiver you and I built a few years ago when you came over and I taught you how to solder and that sort of thing, that was far more expensive than it ought to be from a commercial point of view. But I know we had a hell of a lot of fun building it. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Very true, very true. Well, we always like people dropping us mails and stuff there. So we've got some stuff in the news in brief there that came mailed into us. But Trevor M5 AKA dropped us a mail following on from the cryptocurrency conversation on the 40-meter band, and he remarks that the US amateur radio regulations differ from those in some countries, and the FCC regs permit calls to place an order for a commercial product may be made, such as the proverbial call to the pizza restaurant to order food. And he's probably suggesting this is the reason why you could make a transfer of cryptocurrency over the American airways there. So certainly worth shouting out there, Trevor. He suggests the ARRL.org website /phone-patch-guidelines is the reference to that as well there. So check that out, guys, and that explains why you probably could do this in the States instead of some other countries along the lines. Thanks, Trevor, for adding to that news story from the last episode. Right, checking through our list of things here now to do here. So we've got to thank Chris M0TCH, Martin, Mike 0 Sierra Golf Lima, and Frank, Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel for joining UDAD in the roundtable. As always, we point you towards the places where you can get information throughout the next fortnight while we're working on the next show. So that's the Facebook group, that's the YouTube channel, youtube.com/ICQ podcast. And also, if you go to icqpodcast.com, where you can also find all the links and news and information. If you sign up for our newsletter there as well, you'll get updates of all the latest news stories that we publish to the website over the next fortnight. Right, so you got that there. So, yep, that just about wraps things up. So, yep, it's time to make that cup of tea and hopefully have a scurry around the back of the cupboard and see if you can find a nice chocolate biscuit or two for Mrs. B.
We certainly will, Colin. We'll find her a biscuit tonight. She didn't want to go to work today, but she went. She'll be home fairly shortly, so I'll get the kettle on now. No problems at all, Colin.
Right, okay, guys. Well, we'll catch you all in a fortnight's time, and 73s, we'll see you then.
73.